In 1487, the Aztec emperor Ahuitzotl inaugurated the Great Pyramid of Tenochtitlan. The ceremony lasted 4 days. Historians estimate that between 4,000 and 20,000 people were sacrificed. Their hearts were cut from their living bodies and offered to the sun. When European missionaries arrived decades later and witnessed what remained of this practice, they were horrified. They called it barbaric. They called it satanic. They called it the clearest possible evidence that the Aztec people were savages who needed to be civilized. And then those same missionaries went to Mass, where they participated in a ceremony in which a priest stands at an altar and represents the sacrifice of a human being, the Son of God, whose blood, they believe, was poured out for the forgiveness of the world. Both traditions center on a sacrifice. Both believe the sacrifice was cosmically necessary. Both believe the world would be worse fundamentally, irreparably worse, without it. One of them is considered barbaric. The other is the most widely practiced religious ritual on earth. The difference between them is not whether sacrifice is sacred. The difference is who is sacrificed, why, and what for. And when you actually look, when you go tradition by tradition, civilization by civilization, and ask the question that nobody asks carefully enough, why did every single culture in the history of this planet develop some form of sacrifice? The answer that emerges is not comfortable. It is not simple. And it will change the way you look at religious practice, at human psychology, and at the question of what we owe the universe for the fact that we exist. Mesopotamia, the gods were hungry. Start with the oldest written theology in human history, because it states the logic of sacrifice more nakedly than almost any tradition that came after it. In Mesopotamian cosmology, the gods created human beings for one specific purpose: labor. Before humans existed, the gods had to do all the work themselves, digging irrigation canals, growing crops, maintaining the cosmic order. They grew tired of it, so they created humans to do it for them. This is not metaphor. The Atrahasis epic, one of the oldest narrative texts ever found, predating Genesis by at least 1,000 years, states this explicitly. The god Enki designs humans as divine labor-saving devices. We are, in the oldest theology ever written, the god's workforce. And a workforce needs to be maintained. It needs to be fed. It needs raw materials. So sacrifice in Mesopotamian religion was, at its logical core, maintenance. You fed the gods. Literally, the smoke of burned offerings rose to the divine realm, and the gods consumed it. This was not poetic language. The Mesopotamian theological system genuinely held that the gods required nourishment, that they could suffer from deprivation, and that consistent sacrifice kept them functional and therefore kept the cosmic machinery running. When Utnapishtim survived the flood and made his first offering on the mountain, the text says the gods gathered like flies over the sacrifice. They were hungry. The flood had lasted so long, and all the humans had nearly died, and the gods had been starving. The gods needed the sacrifice more than the humans did. This inverts every assumption most people bring to the concept. We think of sacrifice as humans giving something up, at a cost to themselves, to honor or appease a power above them. Mesopotamia said, no, the gods depend on us as much as we depend on them. The sacrifice is not submission, it is maintenance of a mutual dependency. If you stop feeding the gods weaken. The cosmic machinery breaks down. The floods come, the harvests fail, the armies lose. Sacrifice in Mesopotamia was not an act of faith. It was infrastructure maintenance. The temple economy. The practical consequence of this theology was that Mesopotamian temples were among the most economically significant institutions in their cities. The god-owned land. The god's land was farmed by temple workers. The produce went to the temple. Some of it was offered to the divine image in daily rituals. The rest sustained the temple staff, the priests, the musicians, the administrators, the weavers, the brewers who produced the beer that was also offered to the gods daily. A Mesopotamian sacrifice was simultaneously a religious act and an economic transaction, one that sustained a complex administrative institution at the center of urban life. The god was fed, the priests were paid, the city was organized around the temple. Remove the theology, and you still have a functioning redistributive economy. Add the theology, and you have a reason every person in the city has to participate. Egypt, the sacrifice that wasn't. Egypt presents a paradox. The Egyptians performed animal sacrifice. Cattle, geese, oxen were slaughtered at temple festivals. Food offerings were placed before divine images daily. Incense was burned, libations poured. But Egypt largely abandoned human sacrifice so early in its history that most of its dynastic period shows no trace of it, and the Egyptians themselves seem to have been aware that other cultures practiced it and considered it a mark of civilization that they did not. What Egypt developed instead was something far stranger and in some ways far more psychologically sophisticated: the execration ritual. Instead of killing a person to satisfy divine needs, the Egyptians wrote the names of their enemies on clay figurines or pottery vessels representing the enemy, the threat, the hostile force, and then shattered them. The destruction of the representation was the sacrifice, the symbolic killing standing in for the actual killing. This is not primitive magic. This is an early recognition of something that modern psychology would later formalize: that the function of sacrifice is not primarily about the thing sacrificed. It is about the act of offering the deliberate, ceremonial relinquishing of something that has value, real or symbolic. If the function is the relinquishing, then what is relinquished can be symbolic without losing its efficacy. Mot and the daily cosmic sacrifice. The central act of Egyptian royal theology was the daily offering of Mot, truth, justice, cosmic order by the pharaoh to the gods. Mot was depicted as a goddess, but she was also an abstract principle, the right ordering of things, the proper relationship between all elements of the cosmos. Every day, in temple rituals that the pharaoh or his priestly representative performed, a small figure of Mot was presented to the divine image. The pharaoh was offering the gods the very thing they had created the world to contain. He was returning to the source, the principle that made everything possible. This is sacrifice stripped of blood, entirely a purely symbolic act, whose content is not an animal's death, but the acknowledgement that cosmic order is not automatic. It requires daily attention, daily reaffirmation, daily human participation in the act of maintaining it. Egypt essentially invented the concept of liturgy, the idea that regular, structured, symbolic human action participates in the maintenance of the cosmic order. Every religious tradition that uses regular structured prayer, regular communal worship, regular symbolic ritual, regardless of its content, is building on the Egyptian insight that the cosmos requires daily human attention and that the form of that attention matters. The Hebrew Revolution, when God refused the sacrifice. The most radical moment in the entire history of sacrifice is not the Aztec pyramid. It is a man walking up a mountain with his son and a knife. Genesis 22. Abraham and Isaac. God commands Abraham to sacrifice his son, his only son, the child of the covenant, the one through whom all the promises were supposed to be fulfilled. Abraham obeys. He binds Isaac on the altar. He raises the knife, and God stops him. A ram caught in the thicket is sacrificed instead. Isaac lives, and God says, "Now I know that you fear God, because you did not withhold your son, your only son, from me." This story has been interpreted in more ways than almost any other text in human history. Kierkegaard wrote an entire philosophical treatise about it, Fear and Trembling That Never Resolves the Moral Paradox. How do you evaluate a command to do something that is intrinsically wrong? What does it mean to obey it? What does it mean to obey it and then have it stopped? But the theological function of the story within the Hebrew tradition is fairly clear. It is the moment at which child sacrifice is explicitly, permanently, divinely prohibited. The story is structured as a test, but the test is not of Abraham's obedience in the usual sense. The test is of what Abraham thinks God wants. And what God says by stopping the sacrifice is, not this, never this. The neighboring cultures of ancient Israel practiced child sacrifice. The god Molech, identified in the Bible as a Canaanite deity, was worshipped with the sacrifice of children in the valley of Hinnom. The prophets condemned this practice repeatedly and with horror. The Hebrew tradition defined itself, in part, by what it refused to sacrifice: the Levitical system. But the Hebrew tradition did not abandon sacrifice, it reorganized it. The Levitical sacrificial system described in Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers is one of the most elaborate ritual frameworks in any ancient religion. 5 main types of offering: the burnt offering, the grain offering, the peace offering, the sin offering, the guilt offering, each with specific procedures, specific species of animals, specific portions reserved for the priests, and specific portions burned for God. The system was not primarily about feeding the divine, as in Mesopotamia. The Hebrew God explicitly did not need to eat. Psalm 50 makes this point directly. I do not rebuke you for your sacrifices or your burnt offerings, which are ever before me. I have no need of a bull from your stall. What the Levitical sacrifices were about, the theology is explicit, was atonement, the restoration of a relationship that had been damaged by human failure. The Hebrew word kapara, usually translated as atonement, contains the root meaning of covering, wiping clean, restoring to the original condition. Sacrifice in the Hebrew system was not about feeding God or maintaining cosmic machinery. It was about repair. Something had gone wrong between the human and the divine. The sacrifice addressed it. The relationship was restored. The prophets and the internal sacrifice. But then something unexpected happened to the sacrificial system. The prophets Isaiah, Jeremiah, Amos, Micah, Hosea began to argue that the external sacrifice, performed without internal change, was worse than no sacrifice at all. Isaiah 1: Your countless sacrifices, what are they to me, says the Lord? I have more than enough of burnt offerings, of rams, and the fat of fattened animals. The multitude of your sacrifices, what are they to me? Stop bringing meaningless offerings. Your incense is detestable to me. Micah 6. With what shall I come before the Lord? Shall I come before him with burnt offerings, with calves a year old? Will the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams, with 10,000 rivers of olive oil? Shall I offer my firstborn for my transgression? He has shown you, O mortal, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? To act justly, and to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. The prophetic tradition performed, within the Hebrew Bible itself, a critique of the sacrificial system it was embedded in, and the critique was devastating. Sacrifice without transformation is theater, the externalization of something that must be internal to have any meaning. The real sacrifice, the sacrifice that matters, is not what you put on the altar. It is what you change in yourself. Christianity, the sacrifice that ends all sacrifices. The theological structure of Christianity is, at its center, a sacrifice. But it is a sacrifice designed to make all other sacrifices unnecessary. This is the claim, and understanding it requires sitting with how strange it actually is. The logic of the atonement. Christian theology, particularly as developed by Paul and later systematized by Anselm, Aquinas, and the Reformers, holds that human sin has created a debt. Not a debt that can be repaid by human effort, because the party offended is infinite, and the capacity of finite humans to make adequate repair is, by definition, insufficient. The only adequate sacrifice for infinite offense is an infinite sacrifice. The only person capable of making an infinite sacrifice is God. But the sacrifice must be made by a human, because it is the human relationship with God that has been broken and must be repaired from the human side. Therefore, God becomes human, and the human who is God makes the sacrifice that neither a pure human nor a pure divine being could make. The cross is, in this theology, the one sacrifice of sufficient magnitude to address the entire weight of human moral failure. Every animal sacrifice in the Hebrew system was a down payment, an advance on a debt that could not actually be settled until this moment. The temple system pointed toward it. The Passover lamb prefigured it. The whole sacrificial history of Israel was, in retrospect, a long preparation for a single act. After that act, the sacrificial system was not merely supplemented, it was completed. The Eucharist, the sacrifice that continues. Catholic and Orthodox Christianity does not hold that the sacrifice of Christ was a one-time historical event with no ongoing dimension. The Eucharist, the Mass, the divine liturgy is understood as the re-presentation, not re-performance, but making present again of the same sacrifice. The priest stands at the altar. The bread and wine become the body and blood. The sacrifice at the cross and the sacrifice at the altar are, in Catholic theology, the same sacrifice not repeated, but re-entered, made accessible across time. Every Mass is Calvary. This is why the Eucharist, which looks, to outside observers, like a simple meal with bread and wine, is the most sacred act in Catholic and Orthodox Christianity. It is not a memorial of a sacrifice. It is participation in the sacrifice. The worshiper who receives communion is not remembering what happened. They are entering it. The theological weight of this claim is matched by its existential weight. The most significant event in human history is not receding into the past. It is always present, always accessible, always now. Luther and the sacrifice that cannot be added to. The Protestant Reformation's argument with the Mass was, at its core, an argument about sacrifice. Martin Luther denied that the Mass was a sacrifice because if Christ's sacrifice was complete and sufficient, any human action that presented itself as adding to it, supplementing it, re-performing it was, in Luther's view, an insult to the completeness of what was done. The sacrifice happened once. It was enough. Nothing you do, nothing the priest does at the altar can add to it or access it more efficiently. It is not a resource to be managed. It is a completed act that faith receives. Catholic and Protestant Christianity agree entirely on the fact of the sacrifice. They disagree entirely on what that means for what happens next. That disagreement, which has divided Western Christianity for 500 years, is still, at its core, an argument about the theology of sacrifice. Islam, the sacrifice that remembers. Every year, on the 10th day of Dhul Hijjah, the last month of the Islamic calendar, approximately 1.5 billion Muslims around the world sacrifice an animal. Sheep, goats, cattle, camels. The meat is divided into 3 portions. 1/3 for the family, 1/3 for neighbors and friends, 1/3 for the poor. This is Eid al-Adha, the festival of the sacrifice, and it commemorates the same event that Genesis 22 describes. The moment when Abraham was commanded to sacrifice his son, obeyed, and was stopped. Islamic tradition holds that the son was Ishmael, the elder son, not Isaac. This is one of the significant theological divergences between the Islamic and Jewish, Christian readings of the same story. But the structure of the event is identical. The willingness demonstrated, the sacrifice refused, the ram substituted. The Quran is explicit that the meat of the sacrifice does not reach God, and the blood does not reach God. Surah 22, verse 37. It is not their meat nor their blood that reaches Allah. It is your piety that reaches Him. This verse is one of the most theologically precise statements about sacrifice in any scripture. The animal is not feeding God. God does not need the animal. The animal is not a payment or a bribe or cosmic maintenance. The sacrifice is an act of orientation, a deliberate, costly, visible demonstration that the one who sacrifices is willing to give up something of value, something real, something that costs something in acknowledgement of who God is and what God is owed. The sacrifice is not about the animal. The sacrifice is about what happens inside the person who performs it. This is the prophetic critique from Isaiah and Micah, formalized into explicit theology. The external act is the occasion for an internal act, and the internal act, the piety, the orientation, the willingness, is the thing that actually reaches God. The Hajj is total sacrifice. The greater context of Eid al-Adha is the Hajj, the pilgrimage to Mecca that every Muslim who is physically and financially able is required to perform once in their lifetime. The Hajj is the most complete sacrifice in Islamic practice, not of an animal, but of the self. You leave your home, your family, your comfort, your social identity. You put on the ihram 2 white sheets, the same for every pilgrim, regardless of wealth or status. A king in ihram is indistinguishable from a pauper in ihram. You circle the Kaaba, run between the hills of Safa and Marwa, stand on the plain of Arafat in the heat, throw stones at pillars representing the devil. You give up, temporarily, everything that marks you as a particular person in a particular social position. The Hajj is the sacrifice of the constructed self. What remains when the identity, the status, the social skin are stripped away that is what stands before God on the plain of Arafat. The Aztecs, the sacrifice that held the sky up. We started here. We have to come back. Because understanding the Aztec sacrificial system, not dismissing it, not defending it, but actually understanding it on its own theological terms, changes the question we started with. We established in the Apocalypse video that the Aztecs believed the world had ended 4 times before. The 5th sun, our current world, was set in motion by the gods sacrificing themselves. Specifically, the god Nanahuatzin, ugly and covered in sores, threw himself into a great fire and became the sun. The beautiful and proud god Tecuchistecatl, who hesitated 4 times before finally jumping in, became the moon. The sun exists because a god died to create it. The gods created humanity from the bones of the dead, bones they had to steal from the underworld, grinding them with their own blood. Human beings exist because the gods bled for us. The Aztec theological framework is explicit. We owe our existence to divine sacrifice. We exist in a universe that was built through sacrifice, maintained through sacrifice, and will eventually end when the sacrificial debt is no longer met. The human sacrifice was not cruelty. It was repayment. The cosmic debt. The Nahuatl word for the sacrificial obligation was Nextlahuali debt payment. The sun consumes itself to move across the sky. It requires energy. That energy comes from Chalcuhuatl precious water, the Aztec term for blood, the life force. Without the offering, the sun weakens. The sun stops. The world ends. Every sacrifice at the Great Pyramid of Tenochtitlan was a deposit into a cosmic account that kept the sky moving. The person sacrificed was not a victim in the Aztec theological framework. They were a messenger, a carrier of the debt payment sent to the divine realm to deliver what was owed. Dying in sacrifice was a better death than dying of disease or old age, because it sent you directly to the house of the sun, the highest paradise, the destination of warriors and sacrificial victims alike. The warrior aspect. The sacrificial victims were largely captured warriors, enemies taken in battle, specifically for this purpose. The Flower Wars Xochiayotl were military engagements fought not for territory or resources, but for prisoners. Both sides understood this. The warriors on both sides sought glory in battle. The captured were brought to Tenochtitlan. This is not to minimize the horror. The horror is real. But framing it purely as horror, without engaging with the theology that structured it, produces the same error the Spanish missionaries made. Looking at a system you don't understand and seeing only what your own framework can accommodate. The Aztecs built the most elaborate and most costly sacrificial system in human history on a foundation that is theologically coherent. The universe owes its existence to sacrifice. Sacrifice is therefore the most sacred possible act. The most sacred possible sacrifice is the most valuable possible thing. The most valuable possible thing is a human life. Every step in that logic follows from the one before it. The theological framework is internally consistent, and it is not entirely unique. Because the foundational Christian claim is structurally parallel, the universe's redemption required the sacrifice of the most valuable possible thing, not a human being, but God incarnate. And the sacrifice was the most terrible possible sacrifice, precisely because what was sacrificed was most valuable. The Aztec and Christian theologies of sacrifice are not the same. Their contents are completely different. Their ritual practices are incomparably different in their moral character. But the underlying structure that the most important act in cosmic history was a sacrifice, and that this sacrifice reverberates into every other sacrifice, giving it meaning that structure is shared. What every sacrifice has in common. Across every tradition, across every form, animal, human, symbolic, self, here is what every sacrifice in every culture is actually doing. It is making the invisible visible. The relationship between the human and the divine is invisible. You cannot see it, photograph it, measure it, hand it to someone and say, "Here, look at this relationship." But you can act in a way that demonstrates its reality. The sacrifice is the action that makes the invisible relationship visible to yourself, to your community, and, in the theological framework of every tradition, to the divine. When Abraham raised the knife, the act demonstrated that his relationship with God was real enough to cost him the most valuable thing he had. The demonstration was the point. The relationship existed before the sacrifice, but the sacrifice made it visible in a way that nothing else could. It is addressing the problem of something for nothing. Every tradition that develops a sacrifice theology does so in response to the same basic existential observation. We exist. We did not create ourselves. We did not earn our existence. We received it from parents, from the chain of life, from whatever force or person or process brought the universe into being. Existence is a gift we did not ask for and cannot repay. Sacrifice is the gesture toward repayment that every tradition has recognized as necessary, not because it actually repays the debt. Every sophisticated tradition acknowledges it cannot, but because the acknowledgement of the debt is itself morally necessary. To exist and to give nothing back to receive the world and return nothing to the source of the world is, in every sacrificial theology, a form of moral failure. The sacrifice is the response to the fact that you owe something you can never fully pay. It is practicing loss. René Girard, the French anthropologist and literary critic whose work on sacrifice is among the most influential of the 20th century, proposed that the function of sacrifice is fundamentally social. It channels the violence that human communities generate internally toward an external victim, releasing tension and restoring social cohesion. His theory, controversial, partial, but genuinely illuminating, is called scapegoating. The sacrificial victim absorbs the community's accumulated aggression and hostility and, through their death, dissolves it. This is not the whole story, but it explains why sacrifice and community are so consistently linked, why the sacrificial meal is so often a communal feast, why the offering of the sacrifice is a collective act, why the sacrifice is performed at times of communal stress. The sacrifice practices, in controlled ceremonial form, the violence that would otherwise be uncontrolled, but there is a deeper layer below Girard's social function. Every sacrifice is also a practice in accepting loss. You give up something valuable, irrevocably, and the world continues, and you continue. And the act of choosing to give it up, rather than having it taken from you by force, transforms the experience of loss from something that happens to you into something you participate in. Every tradition that develops sacrifice eventually develops self-sacrifice, the offering not of an external victim, but of something internal: fasting, celibacy, poverty. The night prayer when you would rather sleep, the giving of money when you would rather keep it, the forgiveness of someone who hurt you. These are the same act as the animal on the altar. The form has changed completely. The function has not. The Aztec emperor and the Catholic priest and the Muslim farmer and the Jewish temple priest and the Mesopotamian scribe with his clay offering and the Egyptian king presenting the figure of Mot, all of them were doing the same thing, acknowledging that they owed something they could not fully pay, demonstrating in the most costly and deliberate way available to them that the relationship between themselves and what they considered most real and most valuable was worth paying for. Every sacrifice in human history is, at its core, a refusal to pretend that existence is free. It is not free. Something made you, something sustains you, something will end you. The sacrifice is the act of turning toward that something and saying, "I know, I have not forgotten. Here, take something from me as evidence that I have not forgotten." Whether that something is a Mesopotamian god who needs feeding or an infinite divine being who needs nothing. Whether the sacrifice is a bull or a prayer or 40 days of fasting or the daily decision to live by a moral code that costs you something, the gesture is the same. It is the human acknowledgement that the universe did not have to contain you. And that gratitude for existence is not a feeling. It is an act. Every civilization in history has known this. The question they disagreed about, the question every tradition answers differently, is not whether to sacrifice. It is what, exactly, the universe is asking for.